Welcome, dear listener. The rain has started to fall, and the world outside has grown still. Let this gentle sound of water on leaves, rooftops, and window panes wash over you, like a comforting embrace from the night. You're safe here, wrapped in blankets, tucked away from the world. But as the rain soothes your senses, I'll share with you stories. Tales that tiptoe between the strange and the mysterious, the shadowy and the unknown. They're not meant to startle you, only to linger softly, like whispers in the dark. These are stories for those who love the quiet thrill of the unknown, for those who find beauty in the eerie and calm in the shadows. So breathe deeply. Let the sound of the rain calm your mind. Relax, and let the weight of the day melt away. Now, close your eyes if you wish, and allow me to guide you through the veil of ordinary reality, into a world where mystery lives just beyond the light. Let's begin.
I never thought a simple job as a house sitter would entrap me in an unimaginable nightmare. A month's rent for a sparsely furnished cottage nestled on the outskirts of Liberty Falls was too good to resist. What could go wrong? As I drove through winding roads lined with whispering trees, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. The neighborhood had a charm about it, never crowded, each house standing like a sentinel keeping watch over the wilds beyond. But that charm dissipated the moment I pressed my foot on the threshold of the old Abernathy estate. The creaking door opened reluctantly, groaning as if it were warning me to turn back. From deeper in the woods, the shadows began to loom larger, and with them, a chilling breeze passed through the open doorway, wrapping around my ankles like icy fingers. The interior was dimly lit, even with the daylight filtering through grimy windows. Dust particles danced in the golden rays, floating lazily in the musty air. The scent of something stale clung to the walls, as if the house had absorbed every unspeakable secret whispered in its corners. The dimness cast dark patterns that twisted through the hallways, creating shadowy figures that seemed to flicker with life only when I wasn't looking directly at them. With a shudder, I dropped my bags onto the floor and scanned the eerily silent rooms. Once a proud abode, it now appeared resigned to its fate. Faded wallpaper, empty rooms, and a peculiar absence of warmth. I attempted to shake off the unease that clutched my throat, reminding myself that maybe I was being irrational. The first days passed uneventfully. I engaged in the usual rituals, waking early, making coffee, wandering through the expansive garden, and letting the warm sun kiss my skin. The garden, wild and unkempt, transformed into a labyrinth, with twisting vines and towering sunflowers whispering secrets into the wind. I explored every inch of the property, hoping to uncover something interesting. An old teacup, a forgotten letter. But all I found were hints of neglect lingering in the air. That was until one evening when the sun was dipping low, drenching the sky in hues of orange and purple. I settled into the large, worn-out armchair in the living room, a blanket wrapped tightly around me when the first unnerving event unfolded. I thought I heard a laugh. A child's laughter echoing from somewhere deep within the house. For a moment, my heart pounded in bewilderment. Had the owners left children behind? As I lowered the blanket, I stood transfixed, listening intently. The laughter persisted, soft and melodic, like an innocent lullaby. But then quickly, it morphed into a cacophony of high-pitched shrieks that pierced the silence of the night. I raced through the empty rooms, the echo of my breath scrambling behind me. Nothing. I found myself grappling with a mixture of relief and dread. Dismissing it as a figment of my imagination, I settled back into my chair, but the haunting mirth lingered and intertwined with the corners of my mind. That night, despite feeling a heavy exhaustion wash over me, sleep did not come easily. As the moonlight poured through the dusty window, shadows flitted around my room. Then the whispers began. They started out subtle, like the rustling of leaves, only to morph into a chorus of hissing voices that seemed to rise from the very walls. "Get out! Leave us alone!" I pressed my palms against my ears, but it only amplified the encroaching terror. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to go away, but the chilling words slithered ever closer, rolling over me like venomous fog. Around midnight, I heard a muffled thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open and then slamming shut. I bolted up, my gaze darting to the door, and in a split second, I was no longer in the realm of sanity, but spiraling into frightful thoughts. Was someone in the house? Did I let someone in? The darkness pooled in the corners, seeming to breathe beside me. I hesitated but ultimately stumbled out of bed, my heart racing erratically. I opened the door slowly, the hinges protesting against my intrusion of their peace. The narrow hallway stretched before me like a maw, waiting to swallow me whole. The air was thick with fear, holding me back like a vice. Yet my curiosity pushed me forward. Every step echoed, amplifying the dread, but the whispers receded into silent anticipation. I found myself in the kitchen, standing on cold tiles drenched in shadows, when I saw it. A figure, no taller than a child, with hair disheveled and a faint glow illuminating its face, curled up in a ball beneath the dining table. Heart pounding in my throat, instinct screaming to run, a shiver racked my spine as the creature looked up at me. Its wide, hollow eyes bore into my soul, and the silence enveloped us, heavy, almost tangible. And then I heard it again. The laughter, this time more like a gurgling murmur, dripping like poison into the air. It invited me closer, called me to join its chorus. Despite my instincts screaming at me to run, I felt an unfathomable connection pull me towards the entity. As I knelt down, curiosity overcoming fear, it croaked, "Why did you come here?" I swallowed hard, no words spilling from my lips, but my heart screamed for the truth to reverberate through the stillness. "Hi, I'm the house sitter." "House sitters are not welcome," it whispered again, and I choked on the foreboding sensation creeping up my spine. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything familiar. All my senses heightened, almost painfully so, and just as I prepared to flee, the figure lunged at me with unexpected speed. In a flash, I was enveloped by darkness. I felt a clammy hand clutch at my wrist, my screams silenced by an all-consuming shadow. The last thing I remember was the whispers blending into chaos, mocking my foolishness. The house had swallowed me whole after all, its twisted secret forever lingering in the silence of its hollow walls. I could hear the muffled laughter again, but this time it was no longer a child's. It was mind echoing like a haunting lament of what could have been.
It was well past midnight when Jesse stumbled into the Sundown Diner, a place that the neon sign outside promised was open 24/7. The diner had that slightly run-down charm. The formica tables were chipped at the edges, and the vinyl seats had seen better days, their surfaces cracked like the fragile skin of a forgotten memory. The air inside was heavy with the aroma of burnt coffee and greasy fried food, a scent that might normally inspire disgust. But tonight, It wafted over Jesse like a thin veil of comfort. He slid into a booth in the corner, an involuntary shudder passing through him as he felt the sticky residue left by countless patrons before him. The late hour seemed to thicken the silence, punctuated only by the humming of an overhead fluorescent light that flickered on the verge of total failure. As he perused the menu, a figure caught his eye. At the counter sat another man, an anomaly in the diner's late-night crowd. He was shrouded in shadow, his face partially obscured by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat that looked as if it hadn't been brushed in weeks. Clad in a long, tattered coat that hung loosely around him, the man seemed completely absorbed in a cup of coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he raised the mug to his lips. Curiosity piqued. Jesse couldn't help but glance at the stranger. Despite the diner's dim lighting, something about the man radiated an unsettling energy. The air crackled with tension, as if the booth's worn leather had pulled him into a world of secrets too sinister to understand. Jesse swallowed hard, drawing his gaze back to the menu, but not before catching the man's eyes. A murky gray, like storm clouds gathering over an unsuspecting town. "What'll it be, kid?" the waitress asked, her voice rough like gravel. Jesse ordered a coffee and a slice of pie, his appetite surfacing briefly amidst the creeping dread winding up his spine. As she walked away, he dared another glance toward the man at the counter. He found that the man was now staring directly at him, an inscrutable expression hidden beneath the shadows of his hat. A chill crawled over Jesse. It was more than the man's furtiveness. There was something in the unwavering gaze, an intensity that felt otherworldly. He quickly turned back to his table, focusing on the crumpled napkin in front of him, but the unease lingered like a phantom in the air. Minutes felt like hours as the diner remained almost lifeless, the ticking clock on the wall echoing through the emptiness, each tick dragging Jesse deeper into a sensation of isolation. His pie arrived, dessert's appearance bringing with it ballooning expectations of normalcy, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The air shifted again. Jesse looked up and saw the strange man standing beside his booth, an eerie smile stretching across his lips, flecked with something unnatural. "Mind if I join you?" Before he could respond, Jesse's instincts kicked into overdrive, screaming for him to say no. But those eyes, so penetrating under the brim of that oppressive hat, sidestepped his defenses. He gestured for the man to sit, feeling an uncanny mixture of intrigue and dread. The man slid into the booth opposite Jesse, leaning forward until the brim of his hat cast even more shade across his face, and with a voice that sounded like gravel sliding down a mountainside, he said, "You've got something they want." Jesse opened his mouth to speak, but then gripped the sides of the table as a wave of dizziness washed over him. What does that even mean? His heart raced as he tried to decipher the message hidden beneath the man's cryptic words. Jesse glanced at the waitress, hoping for some kind of reprieve, but her back was turned, busy wiping down the counter. He focused back on the man, who now had leaned back languidly, fingers tapping rhythmically against the table. "You're being hunted, you know." The words struck a nerve inside Jesse. He felt his pulse quicken, his breath turning shallow. What do you mean?" Jesse stammered. "Those who come at night. They seek promises whispered in the dark," the man murmured, each word dripping with malice, a predatory confidence. "But you are not what they expected." Jesse fought the urge to flee, battling the paralyzing thrum of fear mingling with curiosity. As his mind raced through potential realities, to bolt for the exit or inquire further, he decided to press on, fueled by a cocktail of dread and a desperate need for answers. "What do you know about them?" Jesse asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man chuckled softly, a sound devoid of humor, more akin to the rustling of dead leaves. "They come for souls, but they never leave empty-handed." You've something they don't wish to lose. Stop, Jesse said, irritation cutting through his fear. This is ridiculous. The man's demeanor shifted suddenly, and the shadow deepened around him as if he were becoming one with the darkness itself. You think they're myths? Folklore to scare children? No. He leaned closer. They are real. They're in this world and the next, and they will take what they want, everything, unless you learn to fight. Fight? Fight, or become their next meal, he hissed. And in that instant, the diner around them seemed to blur and distort. The clinking of silverware and quiet murmurs ceased, leaving only a throbbing silence, like a heartbeat of something ancient and malevolent enveloping the room. Jesse's vision swirled. The stained yellow walls morphed. Shadows danced with grotesque glee. But then, in the eye of the storm, Jesse saw it. Dark figures lingering at the windows, their silhouettes inching closer, eyes glinting with insatiable hunger. He looked back at the man, whose features had begun to disintegrate, melting into shades of obscurity. "They're here!" Jesse shouted, adrenaline fueling a primal urge to flee, but his body remained locked in place, caught between horror and disbelief. "Prepare yourself," the man whispered as he melted into the shadow. With a sudden jolt, the diner erupted back to its mundane reality. The waitress flipping pancakes in a steady rhythm, the living shutters reflecting the cold light of dawn. The strange man was gone, as was the heaviness in the air, replaced by a joyful bustle that seemed both normal and wrong. Jesse blinked in confusion, his heart racing as he looked around. Had it been a dream, or had he glimpsed something that would haunt him in a way nightmares never could? The unsettling truth lingered like a bitter aftertaste, marking him with the knowledge of how thin the veil between realities could be. He left the diner, the sun breaking over the horizon, casting shadows that felt more like warnings than promises. And though he took his first steps toward daylight, he knew he carried a burden. The knowledge of the darkness that came alive in the night, and the strange man who had revealed the truth buried deep beneath a world that chose to ignore it. The weight of fate echoed in the distance, and Jesse could only wonder if he had the strength to fight it.
The whisper of the wind against the aged timber whispered secrets of Alderwood Manor long before the Matthews family made it their home. Nestled within the skeletal grip of gnarled oak trees, the manor stood as a towering edifice of decay, veiling itself beneath a thick shroud of ivy and shadows. Jacob Matthews, a history buff with an insatiable thirst for the past, knew the dark reputation of Alderwood before agreeing to relocate his wife, Clara, and their two children, Sophie and Max, there. But the price was too good, and the allure of history too strong for him to resist. From the moment the family stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was thick, as though the house itself was waiting, listening. Each creak in the aged floorboards sang a tune of sorrow. Each gust of wind through the cracked windows felt like a memory trying to escape from confinement. On their first night, as Clara tucked the kids into bed, an eerie hush fell over the house, broken only by a gentle whisper that seemed to seep from the walls. "Did you hear that?" Clara asked, a shiver creeping down her spine as she glanced around the dimly lit room. Jacob, stifling a yawn, dismissed her concern. It was just the house settling, he assured her, comforted only by the thought that the manor had held more than a few families over the centuries. But as the weeks passed, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, echoing through the halls, wrapping around every corner of the house. The family brushed them off at first, a passing wind, or perhaps the creaking of wood. However, one stormy night, as the electric tempest flashed outside, illuminating the darkened hall, Sophie and Max clung to each other in terror. Their innocent ears caught the soft yet chilling whispers. "Help us, find us, as if the walls themselves were alive, trapped within the confines of Alderwood. They rushed to their parents, shaking with fright. Clara's heart raced as she tried to calm them, but Jacob felt a strange connection to the house, an instinct that tugged at his curiosity. "I will investigate, I swear to you. It's just the wind or the house settling," he said, as bravely as he could. When dawn broke, the sunlight barely penetrated the heavy mist that cloaked Alderwood. Jacob embarked on his quest for answers. He rummaged through the attic, sifting through dusty old trunks and ancient books that explored the history of the house. A yellowing journal caught his eye, the leather binding cracked. Its pages revealed a tragic tale of a family that once lived there, how they mysteriously vanished without a trace, the father's deaths driving him into dark deeds. The entries danced across a narrative filled with paranoia, despair, and a desperate plea to escape the house that held them prisoner. Fueled by determination, Jacob's resolve deepened. Yet, with knowledge came dangerous undertones. The whispers intensified, now more frantic, morphing into cries for help. Clara noticed the change, an unshakable dread woven into her heart. The children began to speak of visions, shadows lurking in the corners of their rooms, figures flickering in the periphery of their sight. One evening, driven by a frenzied urgency, Jacob gathered his family. "The house has a history, dark secrets we need to uncover. I believe they might be connected to the whispers." He didn't know when or how, but something in his gut told him they were not alone within these walls. That night, the atmosphere shifted again. The whispers escalated into frantic screams, drowning out the howling wind outside. The Matthews family was trapped within a maelstrom of sound, each voice rising above the other. As shadows twisted around them, Jacob stood firm, holding his family together. Suddenly, the electrical lights flickered before they all plunged into darkness. Bang! A heavy thud echoed through the halls, sending a gust of cold air that enveloped Jacob and his family. They felt the weight of sorrow, as if the very essence of Alderwood lashed out in anger. "Get out!" A booming voice erupted and the walls trembled. The whispers transformed, angry and vengeful. The children screamed, and Clara grabbed Jacob's arm. Terror pooled in her gaze. In a sudden rush, the family dashed towards the entrance, the floor beneath them rattling as if trying to keep them captive. With each step, they felt the icy fingers of despair clutching at their hearts, the echoes of the lost family, of their struggle, tugged like chains at their souls. Just as they reached the threshold, the door slammed shut, throwing them back into the heart of the cursed manor. It was a battle of will. Jacob slammed his shoulder against the door, determined to free his family from the invisible prison grasping for them. Crack! The door splintered, yielding at last to the unrelenting force of Jacob's desperate push. Together, they stumbled into the murky light of dawn. As they stood breathless, shaken by their harrowing escape, they turned to see the shadows behind them retreating, a cruel, anguished wail rising from Alderwood Manor. It was as if the house itself mourned the loss of its captives, the souls forever intertwined within its walls. Clara wrapped her arms around her kids, while Jacob turned his back to the eldritch whispers, feeling their chokehold release as they stepped away. "We're leaving, and we are never coming back," he declared, the frail remnants of Alderwood disappearing behind them as they drove away. The whispers lingered, however, whispering as the wind blew through the gaps in the stones, weaving tales of the family that had once plundered the secrets of Alderwood, now rooted in the ground. That darkness would forever haunt this decaying manor, until the next souls ventured too close. The sun lazily dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple as the group of friends set up their campsite deep in Whistler Woods. Jason, the unwitting mastermind behind the weekend retreat, was animating the atmosphere with his boisterous laughter, shotgun in hand while he mounted the tent. He moved like a dancer, oblivious to the specters lurking in the thickets. Jessica, with her keen eyes and fraying candor, busied herself fetching firewood. "You think that's enough?" she called out, glancing back as the evening chill crept in like an uninvited guest. "Of course, it's enough," Jason replied, tossing an errant stick into a pile that dwarfed him. Too much for their little campfire, but fine for the season's chill. The shadows multiplied, forming fingers that clawed at the earth and mingled hungrily with the golden glow of their lanterns. Tom and Lila were a couple lost in their own flirtation, poking fun at one another and then leaning in too closely, igniting a flicker of warmth that sidestepped the encroaching dusk. Only Marcus, ever the skeptic, lingered on the periphery, arms crossed, mulling over the choices that led them into this wilderness. As they settled around the fire, smoke swirling in long, coiling ribbons, Jessica recounted an omen of the woods, an old wives' tale she had heard from her grandmother. "You shouldn't venture too deep into the woods after dark. They say the creatures emerge then, looking for the strays, the lost." "You really don't believe that drivel?" Marcus scoffed, poking at the flames. "What kind of creature is scared of a little light?" He held his arms wide in jest, the flames crackling exaggeratedly, dancing with a mockery of their bravado. A rustle in the underbrush made them all pause. Lila, clutching Tom's arm, asked, "What was that?" It was the first ripple of tension, yet Jason waved it away, insisting it was just wildlife. As night descended, creeping in deeper than mere absence of light, the laughter faded into an uneasy silence. Their jokes hung in the frosty air, tugging at their minds as a drumming heartbeat drummed from somewhere lost beyond the darkness. The night wore on, and with it, the shadows deepened. It came first as whispers, the soft flutter of breath. Then, on the fringes of their vision, on the perimeter of safety, figures began to flit. Trees overshadowed by whispers, creatures clad in the fabric of nightmares. A sudden howl shattered the stillness, raw and potent, sending a jolt of adrenaline coursing through them. Jason put on a brave front, gathering more wood, but fear coated the edges like bitter ash. In their hearts, sharp instinct replaced bravado, and the fire offered little comfort. Then, as though the woods themselves exhaled, the creatures revealed themselves. Emaciated forms clawed from the thickets, their eyes burning a luminescent blue, bared fangs gleaming with menace. Tall and sinewy, with skin stretched tight over bone, they glided closer with predatory grace, an invitation gilded in carnage. Panic surged as Tom shouted, "Run!" But the very act of fleeing ensnared them in a tragic dance as the creatures pursued, howling, an echo lost to the darkness. They fled into the wood, the cacophony of snapping twigs and scattering leaves their symphony of demise. They ran blindly, clawing through underbrush that seemed to rear angrily. The trees promised safety, but shadows darted between trunks, tauntingly avoiding the light, yet thriving in haunts of no return. Lila stumbled first, twisted ankle catching her breath as she tumbled into a thicket. Tom hesitated and turned back, reaching for her, but she screamed, her voice raw, forcing Jason to yank him away. "We can't help her. We have to move." The woods closed in, tendrils of fear wrapping around his throat as they carved arteries of escape. Jessica, petrified yet resilient, waved her phone, its light promising momentary solace. But even light had limitations, and dimmed before the encroaching fiends. Finally, they reached a clearing, breathless, panting against the cool air. Jason spun around, his pulse hammering a cacophony of survival, looking for any sign of the creatures. Jessica panted, fingering the trembling beam like a weapon. Then there was silence. No howls, just the breeze, whispering secrets that crept up their spines. But silence birthed dread, a vacuum that amplified their fear. The thoughts surged. Had they outrun them? A shared glance confirmed it. A silent question hung above them like a swinging blade. Marcus swore, an inaudible prayer against the oppressive stillness, and suddenly Jason's flashlight flickered back on, illuminating movements at the edge of the clearing. The creatures circled, keeping their distance, playmates of despair. They glistened, skin taut with moonlight. Eyes pinned on them, they bore expressions caught between intrigue and hunger, a testament to immense patience. The night turned eerie, time a languid fluid, yet reality hung heavy. Jason, in vain, yelled back into the woods, "Leave us alone." Jessica felt the warmth of impending doom flourish around them, the scent of decay and desperation mingling in the air. They mirrored her despair, and all at once, the realization gelled in the silence. They were prey, players in a macabre game of survival. They formed a circle, backs to each other, tense shoulders brushing as breaths became shallow and erratic. The creatures' howls resounded around them, crescendos of insanity breaking the tension as they summoned fear. One by one, the friends slipped into their thoughts, recalling everything they had left behind. Tom thought of Lila. Her bright smile turned frantic. Jessica thought of her grandmother's stories, thickened into their reality. Marcus, the skeptic, wrestled with his disbelief, eyes scanning for salvation in the specters of damnation. No one was coming. They could feel it in the marrow. No figs of hope grew in the shadows that feasted on their despair. Just as they began to accept their fate, the snarls shifted to laughter, mocking and cruel, a cacophony reverberating through the woods. With it came an onslaught of memories of a night that promised happiness, metamorphosed into horrors beyond reason, trapped in a loop of darkness that fed feverishly upon their remorse. As dawn broke, streaks of sunlight clawing through, scattering remnants of shadows, only 3 of them remained: Jason, Jessica, and Marcus. The cost had been too high. Tom and Lila had been consumed, casualties of the feasting shadows that relentlessly prowled the lost paths of their hearts. With mismatched spirits and a tangible loss, they turned to leave the woods behind, fractured and forever changed. Yet the whispers haunted as they treaded away, vowing to return, uninvited, forcing curiosity and fear to entwine like dark vines around their memories. The woods held their secrets tight, waiting for the seekers to return, and they would, with unfinished business and unhealed scars. In the dim light of the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Marianne Albright felt an unease she couldn't quite place. Still, she pushed through to collect her coffee, a rickety mug that had seen better days. She was not the superstitious type, yet an inexplicable knot began to tighten in her stomach. The last few weeks had been exhausting, her 8th period class plagued by a troubled student, Jacob Lee, whose drawings had drawn her attention, though not in the way she had expected. In all her years of teaching at Crestwood High, Mrs. Albright had prided herself on connecting with her students. Yet Jacob was an enigma. He was exceptionally talented, but his creativity was twisted and dark. She recalled the first time she glanced over his shoulder during art class, a fleeting moment where she caught the sharp angles of a figure bleeding crimson onto the page. She had admonished him gently, pulled him aside to talk about the importance of channeling his anger constructively, but her words fell on deaf ears. It was a Wednesday that Marianne first stumbled upon Jacob's sketchbook, forgotten atop an art supply shelf, its spine cracked and pages warped. Temptation tugged at her, a temptation she usually quelled in favor of professionalism. But the weight of her curiosity was unbearable. With one quick glance around the empty room, she opened it. The initial images were chaotic, abstract shapes, somber colors swirling into gloomy landscapes. But gradually the drawings morphed into something undeniable, a series of visions that felt all too real. One image depicted a classroom shrouded in smoke, flames licking at the edges of the desk where she presided over students, their faces still framed in shock. Beneath, scrawled haphazardly, were the words, "They didn't see it coming." Another page revealed a gunman stalking down a crowded hallway, students frozen in horror. Red X's marked bodies lying on the tile floor, while the doom-laden caption read, "Chaos Theory." Each rendering appeared to seep from some infinite well of terror, a compendium of violence descending upon the innocent. It was visceral, intoxicating, as if she were peering into a dark future shaped by Jacob's troubled soul. Days passed, and each evening after school, Mary Ann left her desk in disarray, her heart heavy with anxiety after spiraling through the disturbing portraits. The thunderous echoes of laughter and mundane chatter of the student body faded into oblivion. Rather, every sound morphed into the looming threat projected by Jacob's art. Then came the nightmares. They carried over the visceral images from the book, haunting her in heavy attended shadows. As she lay in bed, the drawings came alive, morphing into movements she would never escape. With each waking day, she felt the pull of inevitability, the roots of a terrible vision digging deeper into her conscience. On a grim Tuesday, a week after she first encountered Jacob's sketches, reality began to bleed into Jacob's art. Mary Ann stood frozen alongside other teachers as a haunting scream erupted from the corridor, piercing through the usual ebb of voices. Instinctively, she knew a reversal had begun. Running toward the sound, her lungs burned, her throat dry as she yelled for help. The students, a wave of confusion and panic, poured into the hallway, scrambling like ants under a boot, chaos erupting in real time just as Jacob had rendered in his drawings. She watched in horror as her class turned frigid before her, shadows blossoming with unfathomable violence. A student, one she had known since freshman year, lay crumpled on the ground. The metallic tang of blood painting the tiles beneath him. Her heart raced, her mind swirling back to Jacob's haunting sketches. How had she not seen it coming? The weeks that followed became a blur of tightened protocols, anguished discussions, and an eventual lockdown of the school. But each day brought a new wave of nightmares that deeply unsettled the psyche of the staff, and each time, Mary Ann would find herself gravitating back to Jacob's sketchbook, as if by viewing it again, she could decipher the lines connecting reality and prophecy. Days turned to weeks, as yet another drawing betrayed the future, a climactic scene of a bus crash. Mary Ann's heart sank with resignation. She felt the looming despair of fate tightening around the students, and it was this very futility that led her directly to Jacob. "Why do you draw these things?" she demanded one afternoon, eyes ablaze with desperate urgency. Jacob looked up from his desk, his eyes devoid of the youthful sparkle they should have possessed. "Because they're going to happen, Mrs. Albright. I see them." His words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. "These aren't just drawings, they are warnings." "What do you mean?" she whispered, her throat closing around the terrible weight of her dread. "People don't listen to the dangers around them. It's all part of the design, the chaos of life," he explained, with an unsettling calm as he rummaged through his bag, revealing sketched outlines of the school she recognized, each one more gruesome than the last. As weeks passed, she found herself entwined in Jacob's dark world, trying to comprehend the magnitude of his gift or curse. The lines separating the two began to blur through the chaos she had seen in his drawings. Every morning she awoke,
consumed by fear. The whispers of premonition rustled the drawn curtains of her sanity as she struggled to protect her other students from the unfolding doom. A chilling suspicion lingered at the back of her mind. What if they could change the future, break the cycle Jacob had unwittingly embraced? It culminated when she gathered her class to devise tools, techniques, anything they could to combat the impending violence she felt in the air. They studied life and death together, made art reflective of hope, exchanged stories, formed bonds, ever watchful of the ominous shrouds lurking near their lives. All that effort amounted to little when the bell tolled one fateful afternoon. An event morphed from dull whispers in the school corridors into frantic screams. It was an event she knew intimately, reaching forth from the exaggerated silhouettes of Jacob's art. Students fled, and despite her efforts, the nightmare unfolded right before her in an explosive crescendo, as it echoed in an architectural phantasmagoria. Fire and noise melted reason, warping everything into grim expectation, the spirals of inevitability consuming them all. As Marianne stared into the chaos, paralyzed by horrifying anguish, she caught Jacob's eye, who appeared somehow calm amidst the tumult, sketchbook clasped tightly against his heart. In that moment, she realized the shrinking seams of fate had closed around them all. The future was already set, relegated to the pages he had drawn and the lines they had discussed with fleeting hope. They were trapped in the very design they tried so desperately to evade, the walls closing in around them like the suffocating embrace of darkness. As the smoke danced around her, engulfing her in a world she could no longer fight, she understood that the drawings had never merely been prophecy. They were also a map to the horrors that would unfold. And as each violent scene erupted like a tidal wave crashing upon the shore, Marianne knew she had failed them all. In the darkest recesses of despair, she glimpsed one last drawing Jacob had not yet shared. A looming specter, a judgment cast upon the faculty, students, and the world at large, culminating in a single haunting phrase: they never learn. And the flames surged forth, as if in acknowledgement of the very truth she failed to see, burning down every realization that once strove for redemption. Daniel had always been a creature of habit. He woke up every morning at 6, rolled out of bed, and stumbled into the bathroom, where the chill of the tile greeted him like an old friend. He brushed his teeth for 2 minutes, sometimes more if he was still tired, then brewed a cup of coffee that tasted like it was made from the burnt scraps of the week's worth of grinds. After breakfast, he would pull on his trusty gray hoodie and head to the office. Life was predictable and, until recently, comforting. But that predictability was about to crumble like crumbling plaster, revealing the dark, rotten wood beneath. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. Daniel was just settling into his desk at work when his phone buzzed. He glanced down, expecting to see a spam message about the next hottest stock or maybe another one from a friend. Instead, the screen lit up with a message from his own number. Message 1. Remember to grab lunch with Sarah at noon. Don't be late. Daniel frowned, confused. He hadn't scheduled a lunch date with Sarah. As far as he knew, she hadn't even reached out in weeks. He shrugged it off, tapping his fingers on the desk, eventually shaking it out of his mind. At noon, curiosity nibbled at the edges of his thoughts. He packed up his things and headed out to a small cafe where he usually went for lunch. As he stepped inside, his phone buzzed again. Message 2. Sarah will be waiting at your usual table. Order the turkey sandwich. She loves it. His stomach flipped. Was this a prank? How did someone get his phone number? He entered the cafe, a bead of sweat collecting at the base of his neck. Sarah was indeed sitting at his table, her expression one of surprise and delight. He noticed her bright eyes, the way they sparkled with unspoken excitement. and he felt a surge of warmth. "Hey, I didn't expect you to come by today," she said, her voice laced with a hidden edge, perhaps mocking the nerve that had brought him here unexpectedly. "Yeah, I got a message," he chuckled awkwardly, not wanting to sound like a lunatic. "You know what? Ignore me. I'm just getting old. Let's order." They chatted, ate, laughed. For a moment he let himself be enveloped in the warm glow of companionship, even as his phone buzzed repeatedly with further updates. Message 3. Don't forget the report due at 3. Your boss will be watching closely. His heart quickened. This was uncanny but oddly specific. He pulled his phone out again and couldn't stop himself from feeling a malaise settle over him. His own text messages were predicting his every move like a puppet master pulling the strings of a marionette. He returned to the office just before 3, his mind racing. As he summarized his findings for the project report, another text lit up the screen. Message 4. Your boss is suspicious. He will confront you about the last-minute changes. Seconds later, his boss stormed into the office. "Daniel," he barked, catching him at his desk. "We need to talk." Daniel swallowed hard, wondering if he had truly been careless with his work or if someone was orchestrating a sinister game. Was he being watched? He tried to speak, but the words felt lodged in his throat. "Sit." The directive was sharp and final. After a terse discussion, the conversation ended. The weight of his boss's scrutiny hung heavy as he left the office, his mind echoing with disquiet. Once home, he slumped onto the couch, feeling the burn of exhaustion in his bones. His phone buzzed again. Message 5. You forgot to water the plants. They'll die overnight. He abandoned his thoughts of rest. It was a ridiculous message, but he didn't want to take any risks. He moved to the kitchen, plucked the watering can from its dusty perch, and indulged in absurdity that he could feel in his gut. What next? The Grim Reaper will tell me to check my pulse? He muttered to himself, tossing water at the disheveled plants. That night, each tap of the screen brought foreboding. Message 6. Tomorrow, someone will appear at your door at midnight. You won't want to let them in. Daniel sat in disbelief. Midnight? His mind raced. Who or what could it be? He wrestled with the unsettling thought, but as the clock crept toward the hour, dread crept beneath his skin like ice. He had barricaded the door with furniture, heart pounding, breath shallow. The clock struck. Darkness enveloped him. And then there was a knock. The sound reverberated through the shadows, twisting in his gut. It was just a dream, he told himself over and over. Another knock, this time louder. Message 7. Answer the door, Daniel. Panic coursed through him, terror fisted in his throat. He fought against the urge, clutching his phone with white-knuckled intensity. No one should be out there. He reached for the light, flicking it on, though the tangible warmth of the bulb felt thin against the looming dread. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection danced, shadows twitched in his periphery. The knock came again, softer this time, a whisper almost. Message 8. You'll regret it if you don't. Forget the rules. He couldn't ignore this entangling thread orbiting around his life. Drawing a breath, he crept to the door. Deep breaths, eyes alive and alert. He pushed his ear against the grain of the wood. Another whisper called from beyond the threshold. Daniel, let me in. It was Sarah. His heart lurched. How? He barely opened the door, just enough to peek at her silhouette, which was swallowed by shadows. Sarah, what's going on? Let me in, she implored. But there was something off in her voice, something broken as if it were laced with the stranglehold of despair. He shook his head, a prayer falling from his lips that it wasn't too late. The messages ceased to arrive. The phone was silent, but the lingering hum of what might follow rustled the hair on his arms. He finally pushed the door open wider, breath hitching as he saw her pale face framed against the doorframe. But as she stepped into the light, her expression unfolded, a veil of terror cast aside. "I know everything," she muttered, voice dropping to a whisper. Daniel's blood froze. The messages he had received were not merely a prophecy. They were the tendrils of something far darker, anchoring itself into every facet of his life. Something that thirsted for control, and now that control had taken shape in the flesh of the only person he ever cared for. The clicks of his phone and the messages received were just the beginning. As Sarah edged toward him, Daniel felt the bitter chill of the nightmare solidifying. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked, and for the first time, he could glimpse the truth that turned his blood to ice. This was no longer just a day out of sync. It was a crushing inevitability. A shadow weaving his very soul into a threadbare tapestry of dread. And as he stood there, revealing his unspoken fear about the change that loomed ahead, he realized he was no longer the architect of his own tomorrow.